Freezing rain had turned Greyhaven gray when a homeless woman heard scratching behind an abandoned flood station. A soaked German shepherd stood at the steel door, trembling from cold but refusing to leave whatever was trapped inside. Mara followed him and found a wounded former Navy SEAL lying in rising water with a warning written across his hand. What she did not know was that the message pointed back to a secret her own husband had tried to expose 26 years earlier. As the Wicklow River climbed, saving one man became a race to keep an entire truth from being washed away. And somewhere between a forgotten woman, a broken soldier, and a dog who would not give up, each of them found a reason to stay. Tell us where you're watching from, and please like and subscribe to help Valor and Paw Stories reach 1,000 subscribers and keep these stories coming. By the last week of February, Greyhaven had forgotten what dry pavement looked like. Freezing rain had polished the edges of curbs, freight tracks, chain-link fences, and abandoned loading docks until everything seemed coated in glass. Beyond the industrial district, the Wicklow River moved thick and dark beneath the low sky, swollen by 3 days of rain and mountain runoff. Water had already pushed into drainage lots near the old rail corridor, turning broken asphalt into shallow gray ponds. Mara Voss knew which places would stay dry. At 68, she had learned that knowledge the hard way. She lived beneath the western span of an overpass where 2 concrete support columns formed a pocket just deep enough to block most of the wind. Her shelter was not much more than layered cardboard, a tarp, 2 wool blankets, and a shopping cart with 1 wheel that complained whenever she pulled it over uneven ground. Everything she still considered important fit inside that cart. 3 cans of soup, a dented metal cup, a pair of dry socks sealed in a plastic bag, a folding knife with half its handle missing, and a narrow wooden box wrapped twice in oilcloth. The box mattered more than the rest. Mara never left it behind. She moved slowly that morning, partly because the rain had turned to icy needles and partly because her right knee had stiffened overnight. Her army surplus coat, faded almost gray-green, hung loose around her narrow frame. A burgundy scarf covered the lower half of her face. Wisps of silver hair stuck out beneath a charcoal knit cap, cut unevenly because Mara had long ago stopped paying people for things she could do badly herself. The city looked different before dawn, less judgmental. No commuters avoiding eye contact, no security guards asking her to move along, no social workers with clipboards and practiced voices explaining choices that never felt like choices. Only concrete, water, and the distant groan of freight cars shifting in the rail yard. Mara had nearly reached the service road behind North Wicklow Flood Control Station when she heard the sound. Scrape, pause, scrape, pause, metal against metal. She stopped. The station had been closed for years. Everyone in Greyhaven knew that. The old brick pump house and its rusting spillway gates sat behind chain-link fencing beneath a crooked sign warning of unstable ground and restricted access. Mara stared through the rain. Scrape, pause, scrape. Raccoon, she muttered. The sound came again, too deliberate. Mara tightened both hands around the cart handle. There were rules to surviving outside, and one of the best was simple. If something behind a locked fence was making a noise that was none of your business, keep walking. She turned away. Then something moved in the mud near the fence. At first she saw only a dark shape. Then it lifted its head. A German shepherd stood 20 yards away, rain running from its ears and muzzle. The dog was large but lean, built long through the legs and chest rather than heavy. Warm tan fur showed beneath a dark saddle soaked nearly black by the weather. One ear stood straight, The tip of the other bent slightly backward. Across the bridge of its muzzle ran a pale mark, almost white against the wet fur. The animal watched Mara without barking. That made her more cautious, not less. Dogs that barked usually wanted you to know what they were thinking. This one looked as if it had already decided. Mara took one step backward. The shepherd turned toward the flood station. Scrape. It dragged one paw across the lower edge of a warped steel service door. Then it looked back at her. Not my problem, Mara said. The dog returned to the door. Scrape. Its rear legs trembled. That was when Mara noticed how badly. Not fear. Cold. Exhaustion. The animal had been standing there for a long time. Mara felt the old irritation rise in her chest, the kind she reserved for situations in which doing the sensible thing began to feel too much like cowardice. You got an owner? The dog looked at her. Of course you do. It walked toward her. Mara stiffened. The shepherd did not rush. It came within arm's reach, lowered its head, and gently caught the sleeve of her coat between its teeth. Not skin, not force, just fabric. Then it stepped backward. Mara looked down at the dog's jaws on her sleeve. You have got to be kidding me. The shepherd released her, turned toward the station, and waited. For one irrational second, Mara thought of all the people who had passed her under the overpass during the past winter. People in heated cars. People carrying coffee. People who had learned how to look through another human being without technically looking away. And now this freezing dog was looking at her as though she were the only person left in Greyhaven who could still be useful. That irritated her most of all. All right, Mara said. The shepherd moved immediately. No celebration, no wagging tail. It simply turned and led her to the fence. A section near the drainage ditch had been bent outward at the bottom. Mara pushed the shopping cart behind a concrete barrier, covered the wooden box with one blanket, then crouched and crawled through the gap. The dog waited on the other side. Don't get used to this. They crossed muddy ground toward the service door. The steel panel had buckled inward near the bottom, leaving a narrow space between the frame and the concrete wall. The dog pushed its muzzle against it, whining once. Mara pressed her face close to the opening. At first, she heard water. A slow sloshing somewhere inside. Then, something else. A breath. Thin, ragged, human. Mara froze. Hey! No answer. She hit the door with the heel of her hand. Anybody in there? Nothing. The shepherd whined again and pushed harder against the gap. Mara scanned the building. There was another way door in around the rear, where an old maintenance conduit ran beneath a collapsed section of railing. She remembered seeing teenagers sneak into the station years ago, back when city workers still bothered patching the fence. Stay here. The dog followed. I said stay. It ignored her. Mara found the maintenance opening half buried behind blackberry canes and wind-blown trash. The metal grate covering it had rusted away from one hinge. She forced it sideways using a length of pipe, then squeezed through. The shepherd came after her. Inside, the cold changed. Outside, rain moved. Inside, cold sat still. Water covered the floor to Mara's ankles. Old pipes climbed the walls in rows, painted industrial green beneath decades of rust. Her boots disturbed a thin layer of oil and silt as she moved deeper into the building. The dog passed her. Slow down! It disappeared around a bank of valves. Mara followed. She found the man between two large drainage pipes. He lay on his side, with one arm trapped beneath him, boots half submerged. He was tall, even folded awkwardly against the concrete, broad through the shoulders, but leaner than his soaked clothing first suggested. His dark brown hair, streaked heavily with gray, had fallen across his forehead. A short mustache blended into rough stubble around his mouth and jaw. His shirt was strange for the place. Olive drab through the torso, close-fitting, with camouflage sleeves darkened by water. The right shoulder had been torn open. Blood had dried there, then begun running again as rainwater seeped through the building. Mara crouched. "Sir?" No reaction. She placed 2 fingers against his neck. A pulse. Weak, but there. The German shepherd moved to the man's head and pressed its muzzle against his cheek. The unconscious man's fingers twitched. The dog went completely still. Mara had seen animals wait outside hospitals, shelters, burned houses. She knew the difference between attachment and panic. This was neither. The shepherd was guarding a promise. "Fine," Mara whispered. "I see him." She checked the wound without pretending she knew more medicine than she did. The bleeding had slowed, but the man was frighteningly cold. There were dark marks around one wrist, bruising near his temple. He had not simply fallen. That realization sat heavily in her stomach. Mara looked toward the maintenance opening. Getting him out would be difficult. Leaving him would be easier. The thought lasted less than a second, but she hated herself for having it. She had spent years telling herself that survival required boundaries, that every stranger's disaster could not become hers. Then the river made a deep, distant sound beyond the concrete wall, water shifting under pressure. The shepherd heard it too. Its head snapped toward the sound. Mara stood. "All right, we do this now." She hurried back outside. The shopping cart became a stretcher because there was nothing else. Mara dumped the cans, blankets, cup, and plastic bags onto the driest patch beneath the barrier. She kept the wooden box under one arm until the last possible moment, then wedged it beneath the folded tarp. It took nearly 40 minutes to move the man. Mara dragged, rested, swore, dragged again. The shepherd stayed close, sometimes walking beside the man's shoulder, sometimes pushing its nose against his hand. Once Mara slipped and fell hard on one knee. Pain flashed white through her leg. She sat in the mud, breathing through clenched teeth. The dog came to her. For the first time since she had seen it, the shepherd left the unconscious man. It stood beside Mara until she rose. That small decision bothered her in a way she could not explain. "Go watch your soldier," she said. She did not know he had been one. The dog returned to the cart. By late afternoon, Mara had gotten the man beneath the overpass. She layered cardboard beneath him, then blankets over him. She changed the soaked bandage at his shoulder, using clean cloth torn from one of her spare shirts. The shepherd curled close to his side, but kept its head up. Mara heated water over a small camping stove. She gave some to the dog first. It drank only after she placed the cup near the unconscious man. "You're stubborn." The shepherd looked at her. Mara almost smiled. Night settled over Greyhaven. Traffic hissed across the bridge overhead. Headlights moved through the gaps between concrete supports and disappeared. The man did not wake. His breathing grew steadier. That was enough. Mara sat across from him with her back against the column. 3 cans of soup had become 2. Her driest blanket now belonged to a stranger. Her shelter smelled like wet dog, antiseptic wipes, river mud, and old concrete. "Look at us," she murmured. The shepherd opened one eye. 3 people with nowhere to go. She glanced at the dog. Close enough. Then she added, That's enough to make a temporary family, I suppose. Sometime after midnight, Mara woke to the man shifting. Not awake, just restless. She moved closer to pull the blanket back over his shoulder. Something hard pressed against the inside of his trouser pocket. Mara almost ignored it. Then she remembered the bruising around his wrist, the torn shirt, the fact that someone had left him inside a dead flood station while the Wicklow River was rising. She reached into the pocket. Her fingers closed around metal. A small brass key, old-fashioned, stamped with a number. 317. Mara turned it beneath the weak light of her lantern. The number meant nothing yet. She set the key beside her. Then she saw the writing. It ran across the back of the man's left hand in thick black ink, partly smeared by water, but still readable. Mara leaned closer. 4 words, then 3 more, written hard enough that the pen had left shallow grooves in the skin. Don't let them drain the East Basin. Mara stopped breathing for a moment. Outside, beyond the pillars, the Wicklow River moved through the darkness, and beside her, the German shepherd lifted its head, as if it had been waiting for her to finally understand that the man beneath her blanket had not simply needed rescuing, he had been trying to stop something. Elias Rourke woke to the smell of burnt coffee and wet concrete. For several seconds he did not move. His training returned before memory did. Concrete overhead, traffic above, cold air moving from his left. One person nearby, one animal closer. Pain in the right shoulder. No weapon, no phone, no idea how long he had been unconscious. His eyes opened. "Ranger?" The word came out rough enough to scrape his throat. Across the small shelter beneath the overpass, the German shepherd rose so quickly that a metal cup tipped against the pavement. Ranger crossed the distance in 3 strides. Elias lifted his left hand. The dog lowered its head into it. Only then did Elias let his shoulders settle. "Easy." Ranger pressed closer. A woman's voice came from somewhere behind them. "If you two are finished confirming the world still exists, you can explain why I lost my best blanket to a man who bleeds on everything?" Elias turned. The motion sent a hard line of pain through his shoulder. Mara Voss sat on an overturned milk crate beside a camping stove. In daylight, she looked smaller than he remembered from whatever fragments remained of the night before. Her faded green coat hung loosely around a narrow frame, and silver hair escaped beneath a charcoal cap in uneven strands. Nothing about her posture suggested frailty. She watched him with the expression of someone who had already made up her mind about several things and was waiting to see whether he would make them worse. "Where am I?" "Under the Marrow Street overpass." "Greyhaven?" "Unless the city moved while you were sleeping." Elias pushed himself upright. Mara stood. "Don't." He ignored her. His boots found the concrete. His legs did not cooperate. The world tilted. Ranger shifted against his left side before he hit the ground, taking part of his weight. Mara did not rush forward. She simply folded her arms. Elias sat again. A pulse of nausea moved through him. Mara raised one eyebrow. "You can do the hero part after you can make it 10 steps without collapsing." "I need to leave." "Of course you do." "There are people—" "Who left you unconscious in a flood station?" That stopped him. Mara moved closer and pulled back the edge of the cloth around his right shoulder. The wound had been cleaned as well as limited supplies allowed. The cut was deep but not catastrophic. Bruising climbed toward his collarbone. More bruises circled his wrist. Rope, or a plastic restraint, tightened too long. Mara followed his gaze. "Those weren't there because you fell down." "No." "Good. At least we agree on something." Elias looked around the shelter. Cardboard insulation, a tarp, 2 stacked plastic crates, a shopping cart missing most of its contents because the contents were now keeping him warm. He understood the arithmetic immediately. She had spent resources on him that she could not easily replace. That made him more uncomfortable than the pain. "You should have called an ambulance." Mara gave him a long look. "With what phone?" Elias looked away. "And before you ask," she added, "I did walk up to the gas station. The clerk took one look at me through the locked door and told me emergency services had already been overloaded with flood calls." "You could have left me." "That option has become painfully clear in hindsight." For the first time, the corner of Elias's mouth moved. Barely. Mara noticed and pretended not to. She handed him a metal cup. Water, lukewarm. He drank slowly. Ranger remained pressed against his knee. "Your dog has better manners than you," Mara said. "He usually does." "What's his name?" "Ranger." The shepherd's left ear moved at the sound. Mara looked at the dog, then back to Elias. "And yours?" He hesitated. "Elias Rourke." "No middle name?" "You charging by the syllable?" "No, just checking if near death improves personality." This time the smile stayed a fraction longer. Then Mara's expression changed. She took something from the pocket of her coat. The brass key. "Found this on you." Elias stared at it. The number 317 caught the weak daylight. His face tightened. Mara saw the change. "You recognize it?" "I recognized that I didn't own it." "That isn't the same thing." "No." She placed the key on an upturned crate between them. "And the writing on your hand?" Elias looked down. The words were still there, smeared but legible. "Don't let them drain the East Basin." For several seconds he said nothing. Memory came back palled, badly, not as a line, as impacts, fluorescent light, a forklift reversing somewhere behind him, a man shouting, Ranger barking once, a gloved hand, concrete, then darkness. He shut his eyes. Mara did not interrupt. That restraint made it easier to speak. "I was working a contract." "What kind?" "Infrastructure security." Mara glanced at the combat shirt. "That what former soldiers call checking fences now?" Elias looked at her. "You know I was military?" "I know what that shirt is trying very hard not to advertise." He exhaled through his nose. "Navy." "Long time?" "Long enough." "That usually means yes." Elias took another drink. "After I left, I moved into private security, mostly utilities, water facilities, ports, storage compounds, places people assume are boring until something goes wrong." "And East Basin?" "A client hired me to audit intrusion alarms at an old materials storage site." "Why you?" "Insurance review. They'd had false alarms and unexplained outages." Mara sat down again. Her face remained neutral, but the name East Basin had made something inside her go still. Elias did not notice. Not yet. "3 nights ago," he continued, "I checked the alarm history. Several zones had been disabled manually." "By workers?" "Supposedly." "Supposedly is doing a lot of work." "It usually does." He leaned back against the concrete pillar. "The buildings listed as inactive were drawing power after midnight. Motion sensors disabled, loading bay sensors bypassed. Whoever did it knew the system." "What was inside?" "I didn't get far enough to find out." Ranger lifted his head. Elias's fingers rested against the dog's neck. I went back after dark. Ranger came with me. Mara's eyes shifted toward the shepherd. Retired working dog? Canine, retired. Ranger looked almost offended by the word. Mara noticed. Apparently, nobody told him. Elias's hand paused. That was the first moment since waking when something softer than vigilance appeared in his face. He doesn't believe in retirement. For a while, traffic murmured overhead. Then Elias said, Someone was using one of the warehouses. Someone you saw? Not clearly. 2 vehicles, maybe 3 people. You went inside? Yes. Alone? Yes. That military training really does ruin common sense. Elias almost answered, then stopped. The old habit was there, to defend the decision because he had made it, because there had been a reason, because competence had become indistinguishable from responsibility years ago. But Mara was not asking for justification. She was pointing at the cost. He looked down at the bruising around his wrist. I found an interior alarm panel that didn't match the maintenance logs. Someone had routed a separate feed through the system. For what? I don't know. And then? Elias's jaw tightened. There was movement behind me. His voice changed, less conversational, more precise. I remember turning. Someone hit the back of my shoulder. Ranger lunged. A second man came from the side. After that, it's incomplete. Did they shoot you? No. Knife? No. That shoulder didn't open itself. Probably sheet metal when I went down. Mara looked unconvinced, but let it go. I woke once. Where? Inside the flood station. Her eyes narrowed. You were conscious? For maybe a minute. Enough to write on your hand? Elias looked at the warning again. Yes. Why? I must have heard something. You don't remember? No. That bothered him more than he admitted. Memory gaps were dangerous because people liked filling them with assumptions. He had learned long ago that certainty invented after the fact could be worse than ignorance. Mara reached toward the key. Did you take this before or after they hit you? Elias stared at the brass. The number. His thumb moved unconsciously over the scratched face of his field watch. Something surfaced. A man kneeling beside him, a jacket pocket hanging open, a key ring swinging. Elias's own hand closing around one piece of metal before someone pulled him upright. His eyes sharpened. I took it. Mara stopped. From who? One of the men. The moment sat between them. That changed the key. It was no longer something Elias had carried into the warehouse. It belonged to someone who had attacked him. Mara leaned back slowly. Then I suggest you don't lose it. Miles away, Deputy Lena Ortiz stood beside Elias Rourke's SUV on a narrow county road where rainwater moved through the gravel like small streams. The vehicle had been found at 7:18 that morning by a utility crew. No crash damage, no broken glass, no blood. The doors were unlocked. Lena wore a dark green patrol shell over her tan uniform. Her black hair was tied into a low braid that had gone damp at the end. At 36, she had already learned that most scenes told the truth in small things before people arrived to explain them away. A patrol officer handed her a clipboard. Register to Elias Rourke, 51, Greyhaven address, former Navy. Family contacted? No current spouse listed. Phone? In the center console. That made Lena look up. You sure? The officer nodded. She opened the driver's door. Phone, Wallet absent, keys absent. A paper coffee cup in the holder. 2 days old, judging by the residue. Lena crouched beside the rear cargo area. Dog hair. A collapsible water bowl. An empty leash clip. What kind of dog? Canine record comes up attached to him. German Shepherd. Ranger. Dog missing too? Yeah. Lena straightened. The preliminary report on her clipboard read, "Possible voluntary departure following contract dispute." She read the sentence twice. Who wrote this? Dispatch note came from county intake. Based on what? Contracting company said Rourke had raised concerns at a job site. There was an argument. So he abandons his vehicle 20 miles away, leaves his phone behind, takes his dog, and walks into freezing rain? The officer shrugged. Wouldn't be the strangest thing. No. Lena closed the door. But it would be a convenient one. She took out a small notebook rather than her phone. Vehicle intact. Phone left. Dog gone. No personal luggage. No visible roadside tracks surviving the rain. She added one more line beneath them. Why is everyone already explaining this? Back under the overpass, Elias was attempting to put on his boots properly. Mara watched from across the shelter. You're still leaving? Yes. You can barely stand. I can stand. You demonstrated that beautifully. I have to find my vehicle. If the people who put you in that station took it, I'm sure they parked it somewhere with a helpful sign. Elias tightened one boot. Mara's irritation had changed, less mockery now, more concern she did not want named. He recognized the type. He was guilty of it himself. I can't stay here. Because you're worried they'll find you? He looked at her. Because if they do, they find you too. Mara's face hardened. There it was, the thing she had expected, a decision being made for her while dressed up as protection. You don't know me well enough to decide what I'm afraid of. This isn't about fear. No. It's about you deciding you're the only adult in the room. Elias said nothing. Mara stood. She was nearly a foot shorter than him when he was upright, yet somehow the difference disappeared when she was angry. You were lying in 6 inches of freezing water yesterday, she said. Your dog found me. I dragged you out. That does not make me your responsibility. It means you're involved. I became involved when I chose to crawl through that fence. That choice was before you knew what this was. I still don't know what it is. Exactly. Mara stepped closer. And neither do you. That landed. Elias looked at her, not because she had won an argument, because she was right. He had pieces. A warehouse, tampered alarm logs, unknown men, a flood station, a warning on his own hand, a stolen key. He did not yet have a story, only evidence that someone else desperately wanted to control one. Ranger rose and moved between them, not protective, simply present. Elias looked down at the dog, then at the brass key. 317, Mara said quietly. He picked it up. I remember taking it from one of them. Anything else? Elias closed his hand around it. A fragment of memory flickered again. A metal locker, or maybe a door. The sound of keys striking something hard. Then the warehouse floor coming toward him. He opened his eyes. No. Mara handed him the metal cup. Then maybe today isn't the day you go charging back into the rain. Elias looked toward Greyhaven beyond the overpass. The river was still rising. Somewhere out there, his vehicle was gone. His phone was gone. Someone had expected him not to leave that flood station alive. And in his hand was the one thing they had failed to take back. A brass key stamped with the number 317. He slipped it into the pocket closest to his body. For the first time since waking,
Elias stopped trying to leave. Not because Mara had convinced him he was safe.
Because he had finally understood that he did not yet know where the danger actually was. By morning, the rain had softened, but not stopped. Greyhaven looked washed thin. Water ran along the gutters in silver ribbons, carrying cigarette filters, dead leaves, and pieces of cardboard towards storm drains already choking on the weather. The old industrial streets east of the river were nearly empty except for utility trucks and the occasional delivery van moving too fast through standing water. Mara had been staring at the brass key for almost 10 minutes. Elias noticed. "You know the number." She did not answer immediately. The key lay in her palm, dull and scratched, the stamped numerals dark with age. Mara turned it over once, then again. "I know the kind of key." Elias sat against the concrete support column with his right shoulder newly wrapped. He looked stronger than the day before, but not by much. The bruising along his face had begun to darken. Ranger lay beside him with his head on his paws, ears tracking every movement. "Where from?" Elias asked. "Union Station." He waited. Mara hated that. People who filled silence for you were easy to manage. People who let it sit there made you decide whether you wanted to lie. She slipped the key between 2 fingers. "Greyhaven Union Station used to have old luggage lockers downstairs, brass keys, 3-digit numbers." "Used to?" "Some are still there." "You're sure?" "I spent 8 years cleaning that station at night." That surprised him, not because he had assumed she had always lived under bridges, because he had realized he had made no effort to imagine the part of her life that came before. Mara caught the look. "Try not to look so shocked. Homeless people generally existed before becoming inconvenient scenery." "I wasn't." "You were." Elias accepted that without argument. It made her distrust him slightly less. "Locker 317?" he asked. "Basement corridor, east wall, unless they ripped the whole row out." Elias reached for his boots. Mara exhaled. "No." He looked up. "No what?" "No going alone." "I didn't say." "You reached for your boots with the same face men use before saying something stupid." "My face has one setting." "That's unfortunate." Elias pushed himself upright carefully. "I can walk. You can limp with confidence." "I need to see what's in that locker." "So do I." "That's not necessary." Mara gave him a flat look. "You were nearly drowned inside a dead pump station because of that key." "Yes." "And the key leads somewhere I know." "Yes." "And somehow your conclusion is that I should stay here?" Elias said nothing. Mara picked up her scarf. "I may be homeless, Mr. Rourke. I am not stupid." Ranger stood. Mara pointed at him. "And apparently I have a vote." Elias looked at the dog. Ranger stared back. "Traitor." Ranger's tail moved once. They left before 8. The walk to Union Station took nearly 40 minutes because Elias refused to admit the pace bothered him, and Mara refused to speed up enough to help him pretend. Greyhaven passed around them in layers. Warehouses with broken windows. A tire shop operating beneath a faded mural. A row of boarded brick buildings that had once housed machine shops. Farther west, the city changed. Rust gave way to restored facades. New apartment buildings, coffee shops with clean windows, and sidewalks where no one expected to sleep. Mara knew every transition. She had learned the geography of who was allowed to remain unnoticed. Union Station stood at the edge of downtown beneath a clock tower blackened by rain. The original building had been restored 10 years earlier, but the renovation had preserved most of the old stone arches and brass-framed windows. Mara slowed when she saw it. Elias noticed. "You all right?" "Fine." But she was not. There were places that remembered you more honestly than people did. For 8 years, Mara had entered this building through the service door at 10:40 every night. She had scrubbed platforms before the first morning train. She had polished brass railings, emptied trash cans, washed blood from restroom tiles after fights nobody reported. Back then, she had possessed keys to rooms travelers never knew existed, a name badge, a locker of her own, a husband waiting at home. She had not been inside the station in years. Ranger moved close to her left leg without touching. Mara glanced down. "Don't start." The dog looked forward. Elias pretended not to notice either of them. Inside, the station smelled like roasted coffee, old stone, wet coats, and electrical heat. Morning commuters crossed the main concourse beneath the enormous departure board. Elias kept his head down. Mara did not. She walked as if she still belonged there. That was when a voice called from behind the coffee kiosk. "Mara?" She stopped. The man behind the counter was broad through the chest and shoulders, with a shaved head and a neat salt and pepper goatee. Tortoiseshell glasses sat low on his nose. A canvas apron covered a rust-colored Hindley, and one hand held a stainless steel thermos covered with old railway stickers. He looked at Mara as though she had stepped out of a memory. "Theo." Theo Bell came around the counter. He did not hug her. Mara appreciated that. He simply stood near enough to make the greeting personal. "Been a while." "Apparently." "You look terrible." "So do you." Theo smiled. Then his eyes moved to Elias. The smile faded slightly. "And you brought company." "Bad habit I'm trying to break." Elias offered his left hand. "Elias." "Theo." Theo shook it, then glanced at the bandaged shoulder. His eyes were warm but observant. He did not ask what happened. Instead, he looked at Ranger. "That one have a name?" "Ranger." Theo crouched just enough to offer the back of his hand. Ranger sniffed once and accepted him. "Better judgment than most people in this building." Mara leaned toward the counter. "We need the basement." Theo straightened. "That sentence has never ended well." "The old luggage lockers." His expression changed. "Those are closed. Closed isn't gone. They sealed the public stairwell after the renovation." "Service stairs?" Theo glanced toward a security camera above the concourse. "Still there." Mara waited. Theo rubbed one thumb against the thermos lid. "You planning to tell me why?" "No." "Excellent. My favorite kind of favor." He looked again at Elias, then at the shoulder, then at the brass key Mara placed briefly on the counter. Theo stopped joking. "Give me 5 minutes." He returned with a ring of service keys and a paper bag containing 3 breakfast sandwiches. Mara started to refuse the bag. Theo held up a hand. "Yesterday's bread." "You're lying." "Professionally." She took it. He did not smile. That was why she had always liked him. He never made generosity perform itself. Theo led them through a narrow employee corridor behind the ticketing area and down a flight of concrete stairs that smelled faintly of bleach and dust. At the bottom, the restored station disappeared. The walls became old cinder block. Exposed pipes ran overhead. Their footsteps echoed. "There," Mara said. A row of steel lockers stood along the far wall. Many had been painted over. Some doors were dented. The numbers remained. Elias stopped. For the first time since leaving the overpass, his face lost all trace of fatigue. His attention narrowed completely. Mara handed him the key. "You took it." "You found where it goes. Try it." He inserted the key. It turned. No alarm, no trap, just a small metallic click. Elias opened the door. Inside sat a black plastic case no bigger than a shoebox. Theo stayed near the stairwell. "I suddenly regret not asking questions." "You can still leave," Mara said. "I can also pretend I didn't hear that." Elias placed the case on the floor. The latches opened easily. No cash, no weapon, no dramatic stack of classified files. 3 glass sample tubes lay in fitted foam. Each contained cloudy water tinged slightly brown. Beside them sat a portable hard drive wrapped in a plastic bag, a folded map, and a narrow notebook. Elias lifted the notebook first. Pages of dates, times, truck identification numbers, license plate fragments, short entries written in block capitals. 2340, truck 8C17, Southgate. 0105, load transfer. 0220, East Basin access. Mara watched Elias read. "What?" "These codes match the vehicles I saw near the warehouse." "You remember that?" "Enough." Theo moved closer. "East Basin?" Elias unfolded the map. Greyhaven's eastern industrial zone spread across the paper in faded planning colors. The warehouse compound where Elias had worked was marked, but so were several other sites. Thin red lines connected them. All of them eventually led back to one place. A broad, enclosed parcel beside the river. East Basin Reclamation Zone. Elias traced the lines with one finger. The warehouse wasn't the destination. Mara leaned over the map. "No." "It was a transfer point." Theo's brows drew together. "What exactly are we looking at?" Elias picked up one of the water samples. A printed label had been taped around it. EB4, date, coordinates. And beneath that, a handwritten notation. CDPBHG, above limit. Mara knew the abbreviations only vaguely. Theo did not. Elias did. Cadmium, lead, mercury. Theo went still. "In water?" "Looks that way." "Could be contamination from old infrastructure. Not at those coordinates." Elias pointed to the map. "All 3 samples came from inside East Basin." Mara looked at the notebook again. "What was East Basin?" Theo answered this time. "Chemical storage, paint additives, plating waste, solvents, back in the 80s. "Before the cleanup," Mara said. Elias looked at her. "You know it?" Everyone who lived here long enough knew it. The East Basin cleanup had been one of Greyhaven's great civic success stories. Years of remediation, federal grants, demolition, soil replacement. Eventually, the city declared the zone safe enough for redevelopment. At least, that was the version printed in brochures. Elias turned another page. The entries continued for months. Night movements, truck codes, soil transfers, samples, dates. Whoever had filled the locker had been tracking something systematically. "This wasn't random dumping," Elias said. Mara looked up. "What do you mean?" "Look at the route pattern." He spread the notebook beside the map. "Material leaves East Basin, stops at the warehouse compound, then the trucks divide." Theo leaned closer. "Where do they go?" Elias pointed to several marked parcels outside the city core. "Different properties." "Why?" "To dilute the source." Mara understood before Theo did. If contaminated material stays in one place, investigators know where it came from. Yes. But if you move pieces of it everywhere, you make the origin harder to prove. Theo stared at the map. Why do this now? Elias found another sheet folded beneath it, a printed notice. Independent Environmental Verification, East Basin, scheduled inspection, less than 2 weeks away. They're running out of time, he said. The room seemed colder. Mara reached for the map again. Her fingers paused near the lower edge. There was something familiar in the old infrastructure lines beneath the newer markings. A thick blue channel ran east from the basin toward the Wicklow. She unfolded the map farther. A notation appeared beside it. Emergency Discharge Tunnel E2. Mara's breathing changed. Elias noticed immediately. What? She did not answer. Instead, she followed the blue line with one finger, past the basin wall, under the old service road, through a gate control structure. Directly into the river. Theo looked over her shoulder. That still exists? It did. When? When the basin was industrial. Elias stared at the line, then at the writing still faintly visible on the back of his hand. Don't let them drain the East Basin. Until that moment, the message had sounded like a warning about flood control. Now it meant something else. If they open this, he said, everything in the basin goes downstream. Not everything, Mara said. Enough. Rain struck the small basement window near the ceiling. Elias looked back at the samples, the notebook, the truck routes. If the contaminated sediment gets flushed during a flood event, the river mixes it with everything else. Theo's face tightened. Natural disaster. Exactly. Mara stared at the map. The logic was ugly because it was simple. A rising river, emergency gates opened, contaminated water and sediment released. By the time anyone sampled downstream, the pollution would be dispersed across miles. No clean source, no obvious point of origin, no intact basin sediment to compare. A crime transformed into weather. Theo broke the silence. When does the river crest? Mara looked toward the basement ceiling as though she could see the sky beyond it. Forecast was tomorrow night. Theo shook his head. Updated this morning. He pulled out his phone. The weather alert was already on the screen. Wicklow River expected to reach major flood stage within 36 to 48 hours. No one spoke. Elias folded the map slowly. The movement was careful because his shoulder hurt. But Mara understood that was not why. He had gone into a warehouse thinking he was investigating tampered alarm systems. He had believed someone attacked him because he had seen unauthorized activity. Now the shape of the problem had changed. The warehouse was peripheral. The trucks were peripheral. Even the samples were only pieces. East Basin was the center. And the river was not merely a threat to Greyhaven. It was a clock. Ranger had been quiet the entire time. Now the shepherd stood and moved closer to the table where the map lay. Mara watched him, then looked toward Elias. So what do we do? Elias looked at the brass key in his palm. A day earlier, it had been a mystery. Now it had opened a locker full of evidence that someone had hidden carefully enough to risk killing for. He closed his hand around it. We find out who put this here. Mara kept her eyes on the blue discharge line. No. Elias looked at her. We find out how much time we really have. Outside, beneath Greyhaven, the Wicklow kept rising. And on the map between them, East Basin sat less than 2 days away from becoming something the river could erase. The hard drive refused to give them anything. Theo tried twice from the old office behind his coffee kiosk, then a third time from a laptop he kept beneath the counter for inventory and payroll. Each attempt ended at the same encrypted partition. No folders, no file names, no hint of what waited behind it. Elias stood beside the desk, one hand braced against the chair back to keep pressure off his injured shoulder. We need to get this to federal investigators. Theo looked up over his tortoiseshell glasses. With what explanation? We tell them someone tried to kill me over it. That gets attention, Theo said. It doesn't prove what's on the drive. The water samples do. Prove contamination, maybe. Mara sat in the corner near a narrow window, silent. Theo tapped the notebook they had recovered from locker 317. And these truck numbers? Pattern of movement, Elias said. Still not a name. Elias did not like the answer because it was correct. Evidence was not the same thing as a conclusion. He had spent enough years around investigations to know what happened when people rushed the second, because they desperately wanted the first to mean more than it could prove. The 3 water samples showed dangerous metals. The map showed routes. The notebook showed trucks moving at strange hours. The encrypted drive might contain everything else, or nothing useful. Ranger lay near the office door, chin on his paws, watching the room. Theo turned another page. What about this? Mara looked up. Theo pointed to a name written beside several entries. C. Strake. Mara went completely still. Elias saw it, not surprise, recognition. You know him? Mara's eyes stayed on the notebook. Yes. Theo stopped turning pages. The change in her voice made the room feel smaller. Elias pulled out the chair across from her and sat. Who is he? Mara looked toward the window. Outside, commuters crossed the concourse, carrying umbrellas and paper cups, moving through a city that had continued functioning whether she had a place in it or not. Calvin Strake. Theo's face tightened. The Renewal Authority guy? Mara nodded. Elias had heard the name. Anyone who worked infrastructure contracts in Greyhaven had. Calvin Strake, 59, Executive Director of the Greyhaven Renewal Authority. He appeared in newspaper photographs beside demolition sites and ribbon cuttings, always wearing a slate overcoat and the expression of a man who had already rehearsed the future tense. He was credited with turning abandoned industrial land into commercial property, public walkways, housing developments, and tax revenue. People called him the man who brought Greyhaven back. Mara said, He didn't start as an executive. Elias waited. She rubbed one thumb along the edge of her burgundy scarf. When I knew his name, he was an engineer. How long ago? 26 years. Theo leaned against the desk. Mara looked at him. You remember Daniel? Theo's expression softened. Of course. Elias glanced between them. Daniel? My husband, the answer came flatly, almost professionally. Not because there was no emotion left, because there was too much of it to spend carelessly. Mara stood. I need the cart. Elias frowned. The cart? The box. He understood. The wooden box she had guarded beneath the overpass, the one she had carried through freezing rain. Theo picked up his coat. I'll drive. Mara shook her head. You have a business. I have 2 employees who are capable of selling coffee without me for an hour. I said no. Theo did not argue. That told Elias more about their history than agreement would have. Mara looked at him instead. You stay here. Elias almost laughed. No. You can barely lift your right arm. And you are about to walk back to the overpass carrying evidence somebody may already be looking for. Her jaw tightened. That sounds suspiciously like you deciding what I'm allowed to do again. No. Elias stood slowly. This time I'm asking to come. Mara studied him, then nodded once. It was the first time he had seen her accept help without being forced into it. They returned beneath the overpass shortly after noon. The river had risen another several inches.
Mara's shopping cart was where she had left it, wedged behind the concrete support with a chain threaded through one wheel. She unlocked it. The wooden box lay beneath blankets and an oilcloth wrap. Elias had seen it before. He had never seen Mara touch it this way. She lifted it with both hands, careful around the corners, despite the box being scratched, darkened, and worn from years of travel. There was no decorative carving, no inscription, only a small brass lock.
Mara sat on a folded piece of cardboard. Ranger came near, not close enough to crowd her. The box rested across her knees. "You asked why I recognized East Basin," she said. Elias sat opposite. Theo stood near the edge of the shelter, giving her space. Mara reached inside her coat and removed a thin cord. A tiny key hung from it. She unlocked the box, then stopped. Her fingers stayed on the lid. For a moment, Elias thought she had changed her mind. He would have let her. Instead, she said, "Daniel hated throwing paper away." Theo smiled faintly. He kept receipts for screws. He kept receipts for screws he hadn't bought yet. That brought a brief sound from Mara that might once have been laughter. Then she opened the lid. The smell came first. Old paper. Dust. Machine oil. Inside were tightly packed folders, envelopes, folded plans, notebooks, photographs, and a small metal measuring gauge wrapped in cloth. Everything had been protected as carefully as Mara could manage. The top photograph showed a younger Mara, standing beside a man with reddish-brown hair and a short mustache. He wore a steel blue work shirt and had a yellow mechanic's pencil tucked behind one ear. Daniel Voss. Mara picked up the photograph. He worked at the old Wicklow water treatment annex. "What did he do?" Elias asked. "Instrumentation. Pumps, flow meters, valve controls, anything that measured what water was doing before someone in an office turned it into a number." Her eyes moved to the photograph. He trusted numbers. "That sounds dangerous," Theo said quietly. Mara looked at him. Eventually it was. She removed a thin folder. 26 years earlier, East Basin had still been an industrial scar beside the Wicklow. Chemical processors had stored plating waste, solvents, pigments, and metal residues there for decades. When companies failed or disappeared, cleanup became a combination of city responsibility, federal oversight, private contractors, and enough paperwork to make accountability diffuse. Daniel had been assigned to monitor discharge records from several industrial channels feeding the old treatment system. One winter, the numbers stopped making sense. He found waste volumes coming into the annex that didn't match what East Basin operators reported sending out, Mara said. Elias understood immediately. "Missing load." "Or hidden load," she nodded. Daniel thought the records were being altered. "Did he report it?" "More than once." Mara pulled several photocopies from the folder. Handwritten notes covered the margins, dates, flow rates, tank numbers. One memo contained a signature near the bottom, Daniel Voss. Another signature appeared beneath a technical approval stamp, Calvin Strack. Elias leaned closer. How old was Strack? 33, maybe 34. What role? Project engineer attached to the cleanup contractor. Theo looked down at the page. Did Daniel accuse him directly? No. Mara's answer came quickly. He wasn't like that. Daniel believed if the measurements were correct, the right people would eventually have to listen. She looked at Elias. They didn't. The words landed without drama. That was what made them heavy. Daniel filed discrepancies, supervisors sent them back for clarification, he filed again.
One report disappeared from the internal archive, another was marked resolved without explanation. Then came the accident. A pressure valve failed during an overnight maintenance check. Daniel was alone in the lower service gallery. By the time another worker found him, the machinery had already been shut down. Mara did not describe how he died. She did not need to. Officially, it was equipment failure. Human error was mentioned in the report. Daniel had supposedly bypassed a lockout procedure.
Mara knew he never would have. He was careful to the point of being annoying, she said. He would unplug a toaster before opening it. Theo looked away. Elias said, "You challenged the report." "For 9 months." "What happened?" Mara gave him a tired look. "What usually happens when a woman with no money tells a city, a contractor, and an insurance company that all of them are wrong?" No one answered. She lost hours at the station because she kept leaving for meetings. Then she lost the job. The mortgage fell behind. She sold Daniel's tools, then the car, then the house. There was no single dramatic morning when Mara became homeless. There were only smaller doors closing. A friend's spare room, a weekly motel, a shelter bed, a storage unit she could no longer afford. Eventually, everything she still refused to lose fit into the wooden box. Elias looked at her for a long time. The story corrected something inside him. He had seen Mara under a bridge and assumed that was the central fact of her life. It was not. It was simply the last visible consequence of a much longer history. "How long have you carried this?" he asked. 26 years. "You could have thrown it away." Mara's eyes sharpened. "I kept it because Daniel had nobody else left to remember that he told the truth." No one spoke. Ranger rose from beside Elias. The shepherd walked slowly to Mara and placed his head across her knee. Mara looked down. Her hand hovered above his ear, then settled there. She did not cry. That almost made the moment harder to watch. "You're very heavy," she told Ranger. His eyes closed. Theo turned toward the river. Elias looked at the open box. There was no revelation in Ranger's gesture, no mystery, only recognition. A living creature choosing to put its weight against a person who had spent decades being treated as though she had none. Mara finally moved the photograph aside. "There's more." Beneath Daniel's notes were technical drawings, old drainage plans, East Basin schematics, service tunnels, emergency bypass routes. Elias unfolded one carefully. The lines were yellowed but legible. He compared them mentally with the modern map from Locker 317. Several structures matched. Then he saw the discharge tunnel. E2. The same route Mara had recognized beneath Union Station. "This is the original system," he said. "Yes." "Before the redevelopment." "Yes." A stamped approval block sat in the lower right corner, multiple signatures, survey engineer, municipal reviewer, contract project engineer. Elias stopped. Calvin Strake. The signature was 26 years old. Mara reached for another document. Same name, another, again. Theo lowered his voice. "So he knew the old system." "He helped approve it," Elias said. Mara nodded. "And he knew Daniel." That mattered. Until now, Calvin Strake had been merely a name in a notebook tied to current truck movements. Now there was continuity. Not proof of murder, not yet proof of a decades-long conspiracy, but proof that the same man presently overseeing East Basin redevelopment had direct technical involvement with the site when Daniel first documented unexplained waste discrepancies. Elias leaned back. The scale of what he had stumbled into shifted again. He had assumed the warehouse operation was recent, a modern cleanup fraud, maybe illegal dumping by contractors trying to save money. But Mara had paperwork older than some of Greyhaven's newer neighborhoods. "This didn't start with those trucks," he said. Mara looked at him. "No." "It started before Daniel died." Her voice became quieter. "It started before anyone believed me." Elias glanced toward the overpass. Cars moved above them, hundreds every hour, people commuting, people buying groceries. People driving past Mara without knowing she had spent 26 years carrying documents connected to one of Greyhaven's most celebrated redevelopment projects. A woman everyone had stopped seeing had been carrying part of the city's memory in a grocery cart. Mara sorted deeper into the box. The documents became less organized as she reached the bottom. Old photographs, pay stubs, letters from insurers, copies of requests for records. A yellow legal pad filled in Daniel's small, right-slanting handwriting. Then Mara found an envelope she had forgotten. It was marked East Basin Drainage Revision. Inside was a folded blueprint. She spread it across the cardboard. Elias bent over it. The E2 discharge tunnel appeared again. But unlike the public map, this version showed an additional mechanical control chamber on the old flood station property. North Wicklow Flood Control Station. The place where Elias had been left to die. Theo saw the connection at the same moment.
"You were found there."
Elias nodded. Mara stared at the drawing. A line ran from the control chamber toward East Basin. Not direct hydraulic flow. Control infrastructure. Legacy gate systems. Her face changed.
"Daniel said they were supposed to decommission this."
"They didn't," Elias said, "or not all of it." He looked at the blueprint again, then at the documents signed by Calvin Strake. No one needed to explain why the old flood station suddenly mattered more. The building had not been chosen merely because it was abandoned. Someone involved in the present operation knew the old infrastructure. Maybe because that knowledge had never really disappeared. Elias picked up the original drainage plan. "You've had this the entire time?" Mara gave a humorless smile. "I had a lot of things no one wanted." He looked at her. "That changes now." Her expression hardened slightly. "Don't make promises you can't control." Elias considered that, then nodded. "Fair." Mara appreciated the correction more than she would have appreciated reassurance. Ranger lifted his head from her knee. The rain had begun again, tapping against the underside of the overpass and darkening the concrete beyond their shelter. Mara looked at Daniel's photograph once more. For 26 years she had protected these papers, because throwing them away would have felt like agreeing that his warnings had never mattered. Now the same name had returned, Calvin Strake, not as a ghost, not as a memory, as a man still holding power over East Basin. Mara gathered the documents into careful stacks. She did not close the box, not yet. For the first time since Daniel's death, its contents were no longer only evidence of what she had lost. They had become evidence someone else might finally need. Deputy Lena Ortiz did not like coincidences that arrived already explained. By late afternoon, she had spent nearly 6 hours tracing traffic camera records from the county road where Elias Rourke's SUV had been found. The trail was imperfect. Freezing rain blurred plates. Several intersections had cameras that had been offline for months. One municipal feed had been overwritten early because nobody had flagged the footage in time. Still, a pattern emerged. Elias's SUV appeared outside Greyhaven 3 nights earlier, then again near the Industrial Service Road north of East Basin. After that,
It vanished from city cameras until it reappeared abandoned 20 miles away. Lena sat at her desk with one boot hooked around the leg of her chair, dark hair still tied into the low braid she wore on duty. Her silver mechanical pencil tapped once against the paper notebook beside her keyboard. She had written only 4 words beneath the timeline. Who moved the vehicle?
A shadow crossed the glass wall of her office. Captain Warren Pike entered without knocking. At 55, Pike still carried the broad shoulders of a younger patrol officer, though time had settled heavily around his waist and thickened his neck above the tan command uniform. His gray hair was clipped close. A heavy metal watch rode low on his wrist. Lena rotated her chair toward him. "You asked for me?"
"I asked you to stop requesting East Basin footage."
"That's different."
Pike's mouth tightened. Same result.
"I have a missing man whose vehicle appears near that site hours before he disappears."
"You have a voluntary absence tied to a contract dispute."
"I have a preliminary theory written before anyone interviewed him."
"He hasn't been found."
"That makes interviewing him difficult."
Pike ignored the remark. "The matter has been referred."
"To who?"
"Outside agency."
"Which one?"
"That isn't your concern anymore."
Lena watched him. Pike had been her captain for 4 years. He disliked paperwork, public embarrassment, and anything that could turn a manageable problem into a political one. That did not automatically make him corrupt. It made him predictable. This was different. He was too careful. "What agency?" Lena asked again. Pike removed a department challenge coin from his pocket and rolled it once across his knuckles. A habit Lena had seen only when he was under pressure. "Ortiz. I'm asking because if somebody else has jurisdiction, I need the case number." "You don't need anything. Close your notes." For several seconds, neither moved. Then Lena shut the file. Not because she believed him, because she suddenly wanted him to believe she did. "Understood." Pike nodded once and left. Lena waited until the door closed. Then she opened the file again. The rain returned after dark. Mara noticed the silence beneath the overpass before she noticed what was missing. Usually, even an empty shelter had its own sound. The plastic tarp shifted in the wind. Cans clicked together in the cart. The bad front wheel gave a faint metallic squeak whenever passing trucks vibrated the concrete. Tonight, there was nothing. Mara stopped 10 yards from the shelter. Elias nearly walked into her. "What?" She did not answer. Ranger moved past them. The shepherd's body changed at once. Head lowered, tail level. No barking. Mara looked toward the concrete barrier where she had chained the shopping cart. The chain lay on the ground, cut cleanly. The cart was gone. She walked faster. One blanket had been thrown halfway down the muddy embankment. Another floated near the edge of the Wicklow, already dark with river water. Food cans had been opened and dumped. Her metal cup lay crushed beneath a boot print. The plastic bag containing her dry socks had been ripped apart. Elias scanned the shadows beneath the bridge. "Stay behind me." Mara kept walking. He caught up. "Mara!" She turned sharply. "Do not!" The words stopped him. She stepped around him and crouched beside the remains of what had been her shelter. There was no shock on her face. That disturbed Elias more than anger would have. She simply began picking things up. One spoon, a torn scarf, a plastic container with the lid missing. Theo, who had driven them back from Union Station, stood near his truck with the headlights on. "I'll call somebody." Mara did not look up. "Who?" Theo had no answer. Elias saw drag marks near the pillar. Someone had searched systematically. They had not vandalized the shelter for sport. They had opened bags, shaken blankets, cut through the lining of Mara's old coat where it had been hanging to dry. Then he understood. The box! Mara's hands stopped. The wooden box was still with them, wrapped in oilcloth inside Theo's truck. She had refused to leave it beneath the bridge after opening it earlier that day. Theo looked at Elias. They were looking for it. Yes. Mara stood slowly. Her face had changed now, not fear, something colder. They knew about me. Elias walked toward the edge of the shelter, studying the mud. At least 2 sets of boot prints. 1 vehicle tire near the service lane. No effort to hide the intrusion. Whoever had done this did not care whether Mara knew she had been searched. Maybe they wanted her to know. That possibility settled badly in him. You're leaving Greyhaven tonight, Elias said. Mara turned. Theo closed his eyes briefly. He had already heard the mistake before Elias finished making it. Mara's voice was quiet. What did you say? I said you need to get out of the city. No. This isn't negotiable. That was the second mistake. Mara walked toward him. She was small enough that Elias could have looked over her head without trying. He did not. You think I ended up under this bridge because I don't know how to run? That's not what I said. It's exactly what you said. You just dressed it up. Someone came here looking for Daniel's records. Yes. They know you're connected. Yes. So you leave. Mara stared at him. You really haven't learned anything. Elias's jaw tightened. I'm trying to keep you alive. No, you're trying to feel responsible for whether I stay alive. That distinction won't matter if they come back. It matters to me. Rain ticked against the concrete. Ranger stood between them, but faced neither one. Mara pointed toward the ruined shelter. I had a house once. Elias said nothing. I had a husband, a job, neighbors who knew my name. Then one thing disappeared, then another, every time someone told me what the sensible thing was. Move, let it go, stop fighting, start over somewhere else. Her voice did not rise. That made it harder to interrupt. I did enough leaving for one lifetime. This is different. No. This is the same thing with more expensive villains. Theo almost smiled despite himself. Mara stepped closer. If I leave because you ordered me to, then they have already decided where I'm allowed to exist. Elias looked at the broken shelter. He understood the logic. He hated it anyway. That doesn't mean staying is safe. I did not say it was. Something shifted in his expression. That was the point. Mara was not asking him to agree that she could survive anything. She was asking him to stop treating survival as a decision he owned. Elias looked away first. All right. Mara folded her arms. All right, what? You choose. Yes. I can still tell you I think the choice is dangerous. You may use your words like a normal person. Theo coughed into one fist to hide a laugh. Elias gave him a look. Then Ranger moved. The shepherd had been standing near the embankment. Now he began sniffing along the line where the river had climbed into the weeds. His body became tense. Elias noticed immediately. Ranger? The dog moved toward the old rail spur, not quickly, focused. He crossed through the wet grass and stopped near a rusted maintenance post. Then he continued. Mara talked. Elias caught up beside her. Stay back. She looked at him. He corrected himself. Please. Mara nodded. That was enough. Ranger led them beneath the rail embankment toward a concrete channel half hidden by blackberry vines. A corroded steel pipe emerged from the earth beside it. Mara recognized the shape from Daniel's old diagrams. Secondary control line. Elias crouched. A valve assembly sat beneath a hinged metal cover. It should have been old, mechanical, forgotten. It was not. A small, weatherproof black box had been strapped to the housing with new stainless steel clamps. A wire ran from the device into the actuator. Theo leaned in. That wasn't there 26 years ago. No, Elias said. He did not touch it. Mara studied the box. What is it? Remote trigger. Her face tightened. To open the valve? Or engage whatever actuator they connected it to. So nobody needs to be here? No. Elias stood slowly. Rainwater ran from his hair. The implication was worse than anything they had found in the locker. Until now, there had been a possibility that the flood itself might damage the basin and create an opportunity for someone to exploit the disaster afterward. The device changed that. Someone intended to make the discharge happen, not wait for it, not hope for it, trigger it. Mara looked toward the river. How close is this to E2? Close enough to be part of the old control network. A car door slammed behind them. Elias spun. Ranger moved instantly to his side. A woman stood near the service road beneath a dark green patrol shell. One hand visible, the other held nothing. Deputy Lena Ortiz stopped several yards away. Elias Rourke? He did not answer. Deputy Lena Ortiz, County Sheriff's Office. Show me. She slowly removed her badge. Elias looked at it without relaxing. Mara watched him. This was a different Elias from the man beneath her blanket, still wounded, still pale, but suddenly precise. What do you want? He asked. To know why your SUV was abandoned 20 miles from where you were last seen. You found it? Yes. Phone? Still inside. That confirmed one piece. Someone else had moved the vehicle. Lena looked beyond him toward the valve. What did you find? Why are you here? Because my captain told me to stop looking. That made Mara raise an eyebrow. Lena reached inside her jacket slowly and removed a folded photograph. Traffic camera. Industrial road near East Basin. Elias took it. The image was grainy. A dark contractor van, partial plate visible. Timestamp less than an hour after Elias had entered the warehouse. A logo could be seen on the rear door. Greyline Site Services. Theo recognized it. They do work for the Renewal Authority. Lena nodded. Subcontractor. Reclamation hauling, fencing, site security. Elias studied the image. You have anything tying them to Strake? Contract records tie Greyline to the Greyhaven Renewal Authority. That isn't the same thing. No. Lena met his eyes. And I'm not going to pretend it is. That answer mattered. Elias looked at her more carefully. You believe me? I don't know you. Good answer. I believe your vehicle was moved. I believe somebody wrote a voluntary disappearance theory before the evidence supported it, and I believe my captain doesn't want me asking why. Mara stepped forward. Then you have a problem. Lena glanced at the ruined shelter behind them. I think we all do. Theo arrived carrying the oilcloth-wrapped wooden box. Lena looked at it. What's that? Mara took it from him. My reason for not leaving. No one explained further, not yet. Elias looked from Lena to Mara, then toward the remote device attached to the old valve. They had more than they had yesterday. A witness. Historical records, contaminated samples, truck logs, a contractor vehicle tied to the renewal authority, a physical device capable of remotely activating part of the old discharge infrastructure. But one thing was still missing. No order, no recording, no signature directing anyone to open the basin, nothing that proved Calvin Strake had personally authorized the operation. Lena seemed to reach the same conclusion. "This is enough to keep digging," she said. "Not enough to arrest him," Elias replied. "No." Mara held Daniel's box against her chest. "Then we keep digging." Elias looked at her. This time, he did not tell her no. Ranger stood beside them, rain darkening the saddle across his back, 5 figures under an abandoned overpass. A former SEAL, a homeless woman, a deputy working against her own chain of command, a coffee shop owner who had never meant to become part of any investigation, and a retired canine who had started all of it by refusing to leave a steel door. For the first time, they were no longer separate people holding separate pieces. They were a group. Not because they trusted one another completely, because the evidence had finally become too dangerous for any one of them to carry alone. The storm arrived 6 hours early. By noon, the Wicklow had crossed the first flood marker beneath the Marrow Street Bridge. By 1, water was pushing over the lowest concrete barriers near the freight yard. By 2, Greyhaven's emergency alert system began sending evacuation notices to phones across the river district. Theo's coffee kiosk closed before the afternoon rush. The station concourse, usually crowded with commuters, filled instead with people checking weather maps, calling relatives, and arguing over which roads were still open. Elias stood near the departure board, watching a local news feed on Theo's laptop. A familiar face appeared on the screen. Calvin Strake. He stood behind a bank of microphones inside Greyhaven's Emergency Coordination Center, silver hair perfectly arranged despite the weather outside. A dark, waterproof field coat had replaced the tailored overcoat seen in older press photos, but the effect was the same: controlled, reasonable, useful. Behind him, a digital map showed the Wicklow Basin in red and orange. "The East Basin retention area has reached a critical threshold," Strake said. "To protect residential districts downstream, the Renewal Authority is recommending a controlled emergency discharge through the Legacy Relief Channel." Mara stopped moving. Theo looked at Elias. Elias watched the screen. Strake continued. "The discharge will reduce pressure on surrounding flood infrastructure and may prevent a larger uncontrolled breach." The language was careful, not false enough to be easily attacked, not true enough to be harmless. Lena stood beside the table, still wearing her patrol shell. "He's building legal cover." Elias nodded. "If the release happens under an emergency order, everybody looking at it later sees flood mitigation first. And contamination second," Theo said. Mara's eyes remained fixed on Strake. "No." They looked at her. "Contamination disappears into the river," she said. "Then everybody argues about where it came from." Elias closed the laptop. "How long before they open it?" Lena checked a message on her phone. "Emergency review in 40 minutes. Operational staff already moving to the basin." Theo stared at her. 40? Maybe less. Elias looked toward the station windows. Rain crossed the glass almost horizontally. The clock had changed again, not metaphorically, literally. They no longer had until nightfall. They had less than an hour. Lena said, "We can challenge the order." "With what?" Elias asked. "The samples, the contractor records, the device at the secondary valve. That proves somebody manipulated infrastructure." "It helps. It doesn't prove Strake ordered it." Lena did not disagree. Mara had gone quiet. She was looking at nothing, not the screen, not Elias, somewhere else, 26 years back. Daniel's drawings had been spread across Theo's storage table since morning. Mara moved toward them. She pulled one blueprint free.
Mechanical recorder.
Elias turned. What? Mara flattened the page.
Daniel complained about it constantly.
Theo leaned closer. About what?
The old gate system. Her finger moved along a section beneath North Wicklow Flood Control Station. There was an independent operations recorder in the lower control chamber. Elias bent over the drawing. The notation was faded. Local actuation log, mech backup. Mara tapped it. They didn't trust the electronic control system. If power failed, the mechanical logger still recorded gate movement. When was this installed? Lena asked. Before the first cleanup. Still operational? I don't know. Elias looked at the page. If they kept any part of the old actuator network alive, they may have kept the logger. Mara nodded. Daniel had once described it as stubborn machinery built for people who did not trust computers. Every manual engagement, every remote test, every valve cycle recorded independently. Elias looked toward Ranger.
The shepherd was already standing. No, Lena said. Elias glanced at her. You're injured. I've been injured before. That isn't reassuring. Mara folded the blueprint. I'm coming. Elias turned toward her. For half a second, the old reflex returned. No, too dangerous. Stay here. He stopped before saying any of it. Mara saw him make the choice. That mattered. What do you remember about the chamber? He asked instead. Her expression softened by 1 degree. Enough to get lost with confidence. Theo picked up his truck keys. I'll drive. Lena shook her head. You're not going inside. Theo looked offended. I was hoping to survive this story. You can help from outside. I can live with that. The road to North Wicklow Flood Control Station barely resembled a road anymore. Theo's truck pushed through water deep enough to cover the lower third of the tires. Emergency vehicles moved in the opposite direction toward residential evacuation zones. At the old station, the outer drainage field had become a shallow lake. Elias stepped out first. Rain struck his face. Ranger jumped down beside him. Mara followed with the blueprint sealed inside a clear plastic sleeve. Theo leaned across the cab. You have 30 minutes before Lena says Strake's order becomes executable. Stay on radio, Elias said. Theo held up a handheld set. Already regretting this, Mara closed the door. They moved. The fence gap from the first night was now underwater. Elias found a higher section where the chain link had pulled loose from a concrete anchor. Ranger went through first. Mara followed. The pump station door stood open. Water had risen inside to mid-calf. The first time Mara had entered, the building had felt abandoned. Now, it felt awake. Pipes vibrated. Old housings groaned under pressure. Somewhere below them, water moved hard through a channel. Elias swept a flashlight across the wall. Lower control chamber? Mara pointed. Past the turbine gallery. Stairs on the left. They descended. The water deepened, knee-height, cold enough to make Mara's legs ache immediately. Elias moved slower than he wanted. His shoulder had reopened beneath the bandage during the drive. He could feel warmth spreading under the combat shirt, despite the cold water around him. He ignored it. Ranger did not. The shepherd glanced back twice. I'm fine, Mara said. He doesn't believe you. Neither do I. That makes 3 of us. They reached the lower chamber door, locked. Elias tried the handle. Nothing. Mara studied the wall beside it. Manual latch access.
Where? She pointed to a narrow service panel almost hidden beneath corrosion. Elias forced it open. Inside was a rusted release lever. He pulled. The door gave with a heavy mechanical snap. Inside, the chamber sat above the floodline. For the first time in 10 minutes, their boots hit dry concrete. A row of obsolete control wheels lined one wall. Indicator plates.
Mechanical counters, and beneath a sheet of dust, a rectangular steel housing with a glass inspection window. Mara exhaled. There. Elias wiped the glass. Behind it, a strip recorder sat on a spindle. Paper, ink, not digital, still intact. He opened the housing. The paper log contained rows of timestamps and actuator codes. Recent ink stood out against years of blank paper. 3 entries, all within the previous month. Test cycle, E2 auxiliary gate, admin authorization. Elias scanned the adjacent code block. CSTR01. Mara stared at it. Strake? Looks like an administrator ID. Can it be faked? Yes. That answer came immediately. Mara looked at him. So this still isn't enough. It's enough to change the burden. He photographed the paper, then removed the entire roll carefully. We combine this with access records. A deep metallic impact sounded somewhere behind them. Ranger spun. The floor moved. Not much. Enough. Dust fell from the ceiling. Mara looked toward the door. That wasn't thunder. A second impact came. Closer. Then the hallway lights died. Theo's voice broke through the radio. Elias! Static. Elias, the river just took part of the south embankment. The signal crackled. You need out, now! They moved, back into the corridor. Water had risen another several inches. The current was stronger. Mara kept one hand on the wall. Elias carried the recorder paper inside his jacket. They made it halfway to the stairwell before the building shook again. A section of concrete ceiling broke loose 20 feet ahead. It came down with pipes, rebar, and a wall of muddy water. Ranger jumped backward. Elias pulled Mara toward him. The debris slammed across the corridor. Their route disappeared. For several seconds, all they could hear was rushing water. Mara stared at the collapsed passage. Other way? Elias turned. Service exit. Sealed. We break it. They moved toward the emergency door at the rear chamber. Elias hit the crash bar. Nothing. Again. The frame had warped. He braced one boot against the wall and pulled. Pain tore through his shoulder. The door did not move. Behind them, Ranger began scratching at the wall. Once, twice, hard. Elias looked back. Ranger? The shepherd kept going. Not at the door. At plywood paneling covering part of the corridor wall. Mara's face changed. Wait! She moved toward it. The plywood had been painted years ago to match the concrete, almost invisible in low light. Mara touched the edge. Daniel's drawing. Elias stared. What? There used to be a maintenance chase here. Where does it go? Riverbank. Open? Was. Ranger scratched again. Elias jammed his fingers behind the rotted edge of the plywood. Pulled. The first panel broke free. Behind it was brick. For one terrible second, nothing else. Then Mara pointed lower. Not brick. A narrow-framed opening had been infilled only partially. Boards behind it. Not masonry. Elias kicked once. Twice. The opening split. Cold daylight appeared through the gap. Rain. Wind. Outside. He widened it enough for Mara to crawl through first. Ranger followed. Elias came last. They emerged onto the riverbank, 50 yards downstream from the station. Theo's truck horn blared through the rain. Mara bent over, hands on her knees. Elias checked inside his jacket. The paper roll was wet at one edge. Still readable. Still there. Ranger shook water across both of them. Mara laughed. Not from humor. Relief. It was the first time Elias had heard the sound without bitterness attached to it. Then Lena's voice came through the radio. "Emergency order approved." The laugh disappeared. Elias looked toward East Basin. "How long?" "Operational crew has authority now." Mara held out her hand. "Give me the log." He did. She looked at the 3 test entries again. 3 unauthorized cycles. Recent. Admin code tied to Strake. Not perfect, but no longer theory. They ran for the truck. At East Basin, the floodlights were already on. Workers in rain gear moved between control cabinets and the main gate station. A television crew had arrived near the emergency perimeter. So had Calvin Strack. Lena stood in front of the control building when Captain Pike's SUV pulled up. He stepped out before the engine stopped. "Ortiz," she did not move, "stand down." "On whose authority?" "Mine." "You told me this case was transferred." "It was. To who?" Pike's jaw tightened. "This is an emergency operations site. You are interfering." Lena held up the photographed recorder log on her phone. 3 test cycles on the auxiliary discharge system in the last month. Pike looked at the screen, only briefly, too briefly. "Doesn't mean anything." "Admin code is CSTR01. That proves nothing. You already knew." His eyes met hers, there. A fraction too much silence. Lena felt something in her settle. Not surprise. Confirmation. "You knew the old system was being tested." Pike lowered his voice. "Listen to me. There are neighborhoods underwater. If Strake says the basin has to vent, then the basin vents. That isn't your decision. It is above your pay grade." "No." Lena stepped toward the control building. "It's above yours, too." Pike caught her arm. Ranger growled. Everyone stopped. Elias had arrived behind her, Mara beside him. Theo was nowhere visible. Pike released Lena. Strake stepped out beneath the awning. He looked composed. "Deputy, we do not have time for procedural drama." Lena turned toward him. "This is not procedural." She held up the recorder roll. Strake's face changed almost imperceptibly. Mara saw it. So did Elias. Strake recovered. "That equipment is obsolete. It recorded 3 test cycles. Then somebody tested it. Using your administrator code. Codes are shared." Elias said, "Then you won't mind a full forensic review before the gate opens." Strake looked at him. For the first time, the man he had expected the river to erase was standing 10 yards away. Alive. Mara watched that realization cross his face. Strake said, "Mr. Rourke, you are in no condition to understand the hydraulic risk here." Elias almost smiled. "Funny. Last time your people saw me, they seemed worried I understood too much." Pike stepped forward. "That accusation has no basis." Then every phone near the control building began vibrating, one after another. Workers looked down. A local news alert. Then another. Then a live stream notification. Theo Bell appeared on screens across Greyhaven. Not behind his coffee counter. Inside the small community media booth connected to Union Station's public information system. Behind him, Daniel Voss's documents filled a monitor. East Basin plans, truck logs, water sample labels. The mechanical recorder sheet. Theo spoke directly into the camera. If this feed disappears, copies of every document shown here have already been sent to multiple newsrooms, environmental groups, and state regulators. Mara stared at the screen.
Theo continued. This material raises serious questions about the proposed East Basin emergency discharge. Until those questions are answered, every person operating that gate deserves to know exactly what they are being asked to release into the Wicklow. No accusation of murder. No dramatic claim he could not prove. Only evidence. Publicly. Irretrievably. A control technician near the main panel took off his headset. "I'm not opening it." Another worker looked at Strake. "Neither am I." Strake stepped forward. "You have an emergency authorization." The technician shook his head. "Authorization doesn't indemnify me for knowingly releasing contaminated material." A third worker backed away from the controls, then another. The room changed. Strake still had the order, but he no longer had obedience. Outside, the Wicklow climbed higher. Water spilled over another low barrier near the north access road. Sirens sounded downtown. The storm had not stopped.
The emergency had not disappeared. But neither had the evidence. Lena looked at Pike. "You're done giving me orders." Pike said nothing. Mara stood beneath the floodlights, with Daniel's box held against her chest. For 26 years, she had waited for somebody powerful enough to make people listen. It turned out that was not what had been missing. What had been missing was enough people refusing to look away at the same time. Elias looked toward the closed East Basin gates. The river pushed against the city. The storm kept coming. But the gate did not open. And for the first time the truth had survived the water. Spring came slowly to Greyhaven. Not beautifully, not all at once. The rain did not stop because justice had finally become interested. The river did not clear overnight. East Basin did not become safe because a few documents had reached the right desks. For months, the city lived inside consequences. Environmental teams sealed sections of the basin and began taking new samples. State investigators reopened disposal records going back decades. Federal agents interviewed contractors, former engineers, city officials, drivers, and anyone whose name appeared in Daniel Voss's files or the notebook from Locker 317. The story grew larger before it became clearer. Calvin Strake was eventually charged with offenses connected to falsified environmental records, concealment of hazardous contamination, and conspiracy to destroy or disperse evidence. Captain Warren Pike was suspended, then placed under investigation for obstruction and for using his authority to interfere with Lena Ortiz's inquiry. Gray Line Site Services lost its city contracts. News vans appeared in Greyhaven for 3 weeks, then 2, then 1, then none. That was when Mara began to trust that the city might finally be finished looking at her. She hated cameras. More than that, she hated the way reporters described her. Homeless hero, forgotten woman, the widow who saved Greyhaven. Every phrases took a life and reduced it to something that could fit beneath a photograph. Mara stopped reading articles after the 3rd week. She had not crawled through a rusted opening in a flood station because she wanted to become a symbol. She had done it because a dog would not stop asking. Elias understood. He had his own version of the same problem. A private security firm from Portland offered him a position overseeing regional infrastructure contracts. Better pay, better medical coverage, a company vehicle, authority over a team. The email arrived while he was sitting in Theo's coffee kiosk with Ranger asleep beneath the table. Theo read Elias's face before Elias said anything. Good news? Depends. That usually means money. Elias handed him the phone. Theo read the offer, then whistled. That is a lot of money to keep wearing shirts that make civilians nervous. Elias took the phone back. They want an answer by Friday. Theo wiped down the counter. You taking it? I don't know. Ranger opened one eye. Theo noticed. Dog says no. Dog thinks retirement is a clerical error, Theo smiled. Elias did not. For 28 years, one job had led naturally into the next. Military service, contract work, security audits, threat assessments, risk management. There had always been another mission waiting just beyond the current one. He had convinced himself that was stability. It had taken Greyhaven to show him another possibility. Maybe he had simply never learned how to stop proving his usefulness. He looked at the offer again. The job was good. That was what made refusing it difficult. There was no villain in the decision, no hidden trap, no moral victory in turning down money. Only a quieter question. What did he want when nobody needed him to rescue anything? He did not have a complete answer. For once he decided that was not an emergency. He declined the offer Friday morning. Ranger received the news without visible concern. Lena stayed. There had been rumors she would leave the department after Pike's suspension. She did not. She transferred out of his old chain of command and took a position with a regional investigative unit. When Elias asked why she remained in law enforcement after watching how easily procedure had been used to protect the wrong people, Lena gave him a look. You think bad supervision should get custody of the entire profession? No. Then there's your answer. Theo made a different change. At first, it was accidental. His coffee kiosk closed with unsold sandwiches every evening, and for years he had quietly put extras aside from Mara. After East Basin, more people started asking whether they could leave food there. Theo resisted the idea until somebody printed a sign without asking him. End of day shelf. Take what you need, no questions. He nearly threw it away. Instead, he taped it straighter. Within a month, the shelf held sandwiches, sealed fruit, socks, hand warmers, toiletries, and transit cards. Theo refused to name the program. Names attract committees, he said. Mara approved. The city offered Mara housing 3 times. She refused the first 2. The first offer came through a public relations liaison whose smile made Mara want to cross a street. The second included a photographer. That ended badly. The third came from a housing coordinator named Denise Carroll, who arrived alone, sat beside Mara on a folding chair in Theo's storage room, and did not once use the word deserving. It's a 1-bedroom, Denise said. I know what a 1-bedroom is. 2nd floor. I can count 2. There's an elevator. That sounds suspiciously civilized. Denise waited. Mara narrowed her eyes. You're not going to sell it? No. Tell me how grateful I should be? No. Tell me it's a new beginning? I was specifically advised not to. Mara looked toward Theo. He became extremely interested in coffee filters. Denise slid a folder across the table. Read it. Say no if you want. That made the difference. Not the apartment, the choice. Mara took the folder. 3 days later, she said yes. The apartment stood in an old brick building on Wicklow Avenue, far enough from the flood zone to be safe and close enough to the river that Mara could still hear barges in the morning. She refused new furniture from the city. She accepted a mattress, a kettle, 2 chairs, Everything else could wait. There was one thing she wanted immediately: a table. Not from a catalog, not assembled from a box, something solid. Elias built it. He had no formal training as a carpenter and complained several times that wood was less cooperative than steel. Mara told him wood probably felt the same about him. The finished table was simple. Ash boards, square legs, no stain, only oil, strong enough to survive being moved. That was the requirement Mara had given him. She did not explain why. She did not need to. The official letter concerning Daniel arrived in April. Mara left it unopened for 2 days. It sat on the table beside the wooden box. The envelope carried the seal of the State Environmental Review Board. Elias was not there when she finally opened it. Neither was Theo. She wanted Daniel alone. The letter did not apologize. Mara was grateful for that.
Apologies from institutions often felt like another form of paperwork. Instead, it stated facts. Daniel Voss had documented legitimate discrepancies in East Basin discharge records. Several of his internal reports had been mishandled or improperly closed. His warnings were consistent with contamination later confirmed by the reopened investigation. The old finding that suggested operator error in the equipment incident that killed him was being formally reviewed, and the board acknowledged that Daniel had attempted, repeatedly and correctly, to raise concerns regarding public and environmental safety. Mara read that paragraph 4 times. Then she put the letter down. For years she had imagined this moment differently. Anger, relief, vindication, maybe tears. Instead, she felt tired. Not badly tired, finished tired. Like someone who had been carrying a box up a staircase for 26 years and had finally reached a floor where she was allowed to put it down. She opened Daniel's wooden box, removed the old lock, set it in the top drawer of the new table. She did not throw it away. She just stopped using it. A week later, Elias came by on a clear morning. Greyhaven sunlight looked unfamiliar after so many months of rain. Ranger reached the second-floor landing before him. Mara heard claws on the hallway floor, then one impatient scratch at the door. She opened it. Ranger walked in as though his name were on the lease. "You didn't knock," Mara told him. Elias appeared behind the dog, carrying a paper bag. "He says he did." "He scratched." "That's his version." Mara stepped aside. Elias looked different without the field jacket and constant urgency. He wore a stone-gray Henley, dark jeans, and old brown boots. His hair had grown slightly longer over the ears. The scar above his eyebrow remained. So did the scratched field watch. But he had stopped touching it every time silence lasted too long. Mara noticed. She did not mention it.
"What did you bring?"
"Coffee."
"Theo's?"
"Obviously."
"Then you may enter." Ranger had already found his place. Sunlight came through the front window in a wide rectangle across the floor. He circled once and lay down in it. His tan fur turned almost gold. The slight bend in his left ear cast an uneven shadow over his face. Mara watched him settle. "There goes the best seat." Elias placed the coffee on the table. His eyes went to Daniel's box. The lid stood open, no lock. Beside it lay the brass key stamped 317. Elias picked it up. "You kept this." "I keep lots of useless things." "You once carried your entire life in a shopping cart." "Exactly, I had to specialize." He turned the key in his fingers. For months it had moved through evidence bags, interviews, photographs, and chain of custody forms. Investigators had finally returned it. A key that had once opened the first door in the case now opened nothing important.
That seemed right, somehow. Elias set it down.
How does it feel? Mara looked around the apartment. The question was too large, so she answered a smaller one. The radiator bangs at 4 in the morning. I can look at it. No. Elias smiled. I was offering. I know. Very advanced progress. He sat across from her. For a while they drank coffee without talking. The quiet felt different here. Under the overpass, silence had always contained weather, traffic, risk, the possibility that someone might ask Mara to move. Here, silence was simply silence. Elias looked toward Ranger. I've wondered something. That sounds dangerous. The day you found me. Mara waited. Why did you stop? She looked at him, then at Ranger. It wasn't you. Elias laughed, a real laugh this time. That explains a lot. You were unconscious, very little personality to work with. So it was Ranger. Mara leaned back. The memory came easily. Freezing rain, the warped fence, the dog standing in mud with his rear legs trembling. That pale mark across his muzzle. The way he had caught her sleeve without hurting her. The way he had looked at her. Not with pity, not suspicion, expectation. That dog looked at me like I was the last person left in the world who could still do something. Elias glanced toward Ranger. The shepherd had closed his eyes. Mara continued. Do you know how strange that was? What? To be needed without being judged first. Elias did not answer. Mara looked out the window. From the second floor she could see beyond the rooftops toward the elevated roadway. Farther south stood the overpass where she had slept. Cars moved across it steadily. From here they looked small. She wondered how many times people had seen her shopping cart from those windows and forgotten it before reaching the next traffic light. I spent a long time thinking the worst thing that happened to me was losing the house, she said. Elias listened. Then I thought it was losing Daniel. She paused. That was worse. Her fingers rested on the table. But somewhere along the way, I started disappearing before I was actually gone. Elias understood. People stopped seeing you. Some did. She glanced at him. I helped. How? You can get used to being invisible. It hurts less than hoping somebody notices. Ranger shifted in the sunlight. His paw moved across the floor. Mara smiled faintly. Then he came along and ruined it. Elias followed her gaze. Good dog. Debatable. They sat quietly again. After a while, Elias said, I turned down the Portland job. Mara looked at him. You tell me this because you want praise? No. Good. I thought you'd ask why. I know why. He waited anyway. Mara took another sip. You finally discovered that having nowhere you have to be isn't the same thing as having nowhere to go. Elias stared at her. That's annoyingly good. I've had free time. He smiled. The words stayed with him. He had spent years treating purpose like an assignment. Something handed down, something completed, something replaced. Now there was no commanding officer, no contract, no emergency. There was only the possibility that purpose could be chosen slowly, maybe even shared. Mara reached for Daniel's box. She placed the official letter inside, then left the lid open. No lock? Elias asked. No reason. What if somebody takes it? Mara looked around the apartment, at the window, at the table, at Ranger asleep in the sun. At least now they'd have to knock first. Elias laughed again. Outside, the Wicklow moved within its banks. Spring runoff carried branches and last winter's debris toward the sea, but the river no longer sounded like a threat from here. Mara looked toward the water. I used to think God had very strange timing. Elias raised an eyebrow. Used to? I still do, she smiled. Maybe sometimes he doesn't send the person you expect. Her eyes moved to Ranger. Maybe he just puts the right people in the wrong place at the same time and waits to see whether any of them bother looking at each other. Elias considered that. You calling that a miracle? No, Mara shook her head. Miracles are above my pay grade. She pointed at Ranger. That was a wet dog with bad boundaries. Ranger opened one eye. Elias smiled. Mara's voice softened. But sometimes that's enough. Sunlight moved slowly across the floor. Ranger closed his eye again. The man who had been left in a flood station sat at a table he had built with his own hands. The woman Greyhaven had stopped seeing sat beside a window with her name on the lease, and between them slept the dog who had refused to abandon either one when walking away would have been easier. Nothing about the room looked heroic. That was perhaps the best part. There was coffee cooling in paper cups, a radiator that needed fixing, an old wooden box that no longer needed a lock, a useless brass key, and a place beside the window where Ranger had decided he belonged. For the first time in a long while, so had they. Sometimes grace does not arrive as a grand miracle. Sometimes it arrives as a tired dog refusing to walk away, a stranger choosing to stop, or a truth carried quietly for years until someone is finally willing to see it. Mara's story reminds us that being overlooked does not mean being without purpose. Even after loss, dignity can return in small, ordinary ways. A door that is finally yours to open. A table built by someone who stayed. A place beside the window where peace is allowed to remain. If this story stayed with you, share what part touched you most in the comments, and subscribe to Valor and Paw Stories for more stories about loyalty, courage, and second chances. May you be given the grace to recognize the people around you who simply need to be seen.